Marie-Therese, you have a very unique background and context from which this film was made. I spoke briefly about your knowing Steve Bannon in a past life, but was hoping you could perhaps start at the beginning by telling us how did you arrive at the place that you decided to produce this film, and maybe bring us back to the beginning of when did your relationship with Steve Bannon begin, and how did it perhaps inform your decision to make this film?
Sure. So bear with me. It's going to take a few minutes.
Take your time.
So about 15 years ago, I was working at an art house film company in New York, and Bannon put together a small group of people who bought the company. They bought my company and a few other companies, and Steve became my boss. So he was my direct boss every day, although he was living in LA and I was in New York. I worked for him for about 3 years, and as you can see in the film, he was like horrible and really abusive in many ways, and crazy, but he was also great. He was very supportive of the films that we were doing and wanted to do, which were, people would be surprised, which were very kind of some of like avant-garde films, gay films, challenging art house films. And he was very supportive of me. I was a 30-year-old woman, and he promoted me to run the company. So it was kind of like the best of times, the worst of times. And back then, people always want to know about his politics. Back then, he was what I would call a McCain Republican. Some might call a Reagan Democrat. He was a Republican. His politics were not what they are now, and there was not an indication that they would be back then. So the company closed after 3 years of working for him, partially because of him. He kind of ran it into the ground, to be totally honest. But anyway, that's another story. And we stayed in touch for a few years, and then he became a little bit more what I considered kind of radical in his conservative politics. He got very involved with the Tea Party, and I think we just grew apart. The division, the sort of political differences grew a little bit too big for us, and also just life went on and we lost touch. So leading up until the decision to make this, I hadn't spoken to him really at all in at least several years, like no contact. Fast forward, and I vaguely knew that he was involved with Breitbart. I wasn't really following his career, and then I read like everybody else when he joined the Trump campaign. And I'm not I know some people here might be, I don't know, but I'm not personally a fan of Trump. I wasn't a Trump supporter, and I was pretty upset that he did that, and I wrote to him. The next day I had his email. I didn't know if it was still his email address. I sent him an email that was pretty heartfelt, but also pretty dramatic, like this long email, like, think of your children, you can't do this, you have to quit, which was absurd. And to my surprise, he wrote back, which was, pretty surprising, given how busy he was. It was the day after it was announced. And he wrote back, and he was very polite. And that began a kind of correspondence over into the White House, the next sort of 6 to 8 months. I call it a correspondence, but it was really kind of more me writing sometimes really nasty and rude emails and text messages, depending on what was happening in what that White House was doing, what he was doing. And he would always answer, and he was always pretty polite, he was always nice, and I knew he liked me because we had been close way back then, we had been friends. And so simultaneous to that, as that was happening, as you all remember, there was a time when you couldn't turn on the television, you couldn't really walk down the street without seeing his face, reading about him. He was spoofed on SNL, et cetera. And I was watching this media depiction of him, and it was starting to bother me because I knew him. So I knew that this depiction of him as this evil genius, Darth Vader, mastermind, Trump's brain, I knew that he loved it. I knew that, he was laughing at all of it and enjoying it, and that it was actually giving him strength and giving him, personal power and emboldening him. And I also knew that he wasn't a genius. I mean, he's a very intelligent man, but he's not a genius. He's kind of a fraud. There are a lot of things I knew to be true or believed to be true that were not being represented in the media. The other thing that wasn't being represented was his real personality, which is, as you see in the film, he is very charismatic. He can be very funny. He can be very charming, and those are tools that he uses. Those are he's a kind of a salesman. And he uses those tools to kind of get indoors and to sometimes deceive people, sometimes get things past people. But yet in the media, he was, again, being depicted as this like grim reaper, dark, humorless figure. And I felt that nobody really understood who this guy was, or both how dangerous he can be, but also kind of how, in some ways, as I said, like how much of a fraud I felt that he was. So, and it was really bothering me. Like, it was keeping me awake at night. I'm almost at the end of this answer. It was, I couldn't sleep. I was having nightmares. And I work in documentary film. I produce documentaries. And I woke up one day and I thought, I can make a documentary about him. I could make if he lets me, which he might because he knows me, follow him for an extended period of time. Maybe we can actually reveal not only who he really is, but sort of who else he's working with, what his actual agenda is. There was so much kind of mystery around him, and so I didn't tell anyone that I had this idea. I wrote him. I asked him. He wrote back and he said, "No way, you'll destroy me," because he knew very well what I thought about what he was doing. But I kept asking once a week, and maybe the fourth time, he wrote back and he just said, he was still in the White House. He wrote back and said, "I'll do it." And then I just thought uh-oh, now I've got to do this. But that's really that's the genesis of it.
So you clearly had emotion and a bias, I suppose, if you will, going into the making of this film. Though one of the things that I said to the audience in prepping them for the movie, and that I at least felt to be true when watching the movie, was that it was a very restrained approach to documentary filmmaking, that within the format, the fly-on-the-wall verite approach really allows the viewer to watch Steve Bannon. We certainly do see some of the personality traits come through that you just described, but by no means, at least for when I was watching the movie, did I feel as though the filmmaker or you as part of the filmmaking process were trying to navigate me and my own point of view so much as it was allowing Steve Bannon to do that for me. How do you, as a producer of a movie like this, where in this case you have a personal back history and an emotionally charged feeling about it, manage to pull back and create a film that doesn't come at things as, let's say, I don't know, a Michael Moore movie might?
I think a few ways. First of all, I would say that was intentional, not only because I knew him, but I also feel, my personal feeling is that we're living in an age of so much divisiveness, so much, everything is black and white. Social media, I think, has made that a real problem. And we form opinions immediately without really getting able to observe or know about something. I mean, I'm guilty of it also. And I didn't feel like we needed another sort of propaganda piece, even though, yes, I had strong feelings about what he was doing. I just don't think at this moment that propaganda is very helpful to kind of the national conversation. So I really wanted the film to be fair. While, yes, I think there is a perspective, and definitely Alison has one, I felt that, if he allowed us, which he did, and that was a condition, the two conditions were that we could follow him for a long period of time, and that he had absolutely no creative control, no say in the film. So that if he agreed to those, that if we followed him and if she really was able to disappear as much as possible. Now, no filmmaker disappears every single day, every moment of the day. I mean, it looks like it, but it's not possible 100% of the time. But I would say she disappeared a lot of the time, and he forgot about her. I mean, I know he forgot about her. So if you could do that, then people would hopefully, or some people would see what I saw. Some people would see what I knew. and what Alison knew. And the other sort of way I approached that was when I asked Alison to direct the film. She went with me to meet him, and she needed to kind of see for herself like what he was like, but because I had such a rapport with him, I chose really not to be around a lot while, during the filming. I mean, I went to a few events. I talked to him all the time and his staff because I had to, facilitate a lot of things, but I didn't want to be there. I wanted her to be alone because I wanted her to have her own relationship with him. And I didn't tell her even all the things I've told you tonight ahead of time. She knew my politics. She knew basically how I felt, but I didn't get into really any of what I've just told you because I wanted her to kind of, form her own opinion. And it came to a point where we realized that we shared similar opinions, and I was really relieved, but I had to allow for the fact that maybe she wouldn't. I mean, I didn't think she was gonna fall in love with him and think he was the best thing in the world, but she might have had different feelings about him, about the more complicated, aspects of what I talked about.
I'm going to ask you some pointed questions, and if you don't have an answer, because
I'm used to it.
They are questions that might be best for Steve Bannon to answer, but that struck me as I was watching this film, trying to think about him, because for me at least, he's so rife with contradictions. So maybe you could help me with this, and after this, we're going to take it out to the audience. But first and foremost, he's somebody who seems to be pushing what's been coined a populist agenda, and that word is sort of inherently contradictory with what the actual agenda may be, and from what the actual idea of populism means to me, this idea that you're representing, the vast majority, let's call it, or the 99%. He seemingly, to me, is representing a minority opinion. Within that grouping of people whose ideals he represents, he seemingly is perhaps attracting a group that are not part of, let's call it the socioeconomically speaking 1% elite, but he himself is really pushing forward an agenda that will ultimately speak to and benefit those who are the most elite and wealthiest in the country. Have you had any dialogue with him around that? And, or even if you haven't, how exactly does he reconcile these things that are so rife with contradictions?
I think he's full of contradictions. I think he can justify a lot of things to himself. As you see in the film, he's very aware, right? He's self-aware. So in that moment when he's in the private airport and he says, you're seeing me in all the 5-star hotels, et cetera. So he definitely recognizes that he is, you call them contradictions. I might say he's a hypocrite. And I will say, one thing that is different between him and someone like Trump is that Bannon doesn't actually really have regular people following him. He doesn't have a huge following. You see him at these events, you see people there. Some are very poorly populated, some are well populated, but most of the people are there because of his association with Trump, because he's kind of famous. So I don't think most people are there because, they're huge fans of Steve Bannon. I think that question could definitely be asked of Trump, and why do so many people who seemingly do not benefit from his policies support him? Bannon, I don't think, has that many regular people following him, and he definitely operates and moves on a daily basis in a quite elite, wealthy world. You see the people that he spends most of his time with. What I will say in his defense is that he's not faking the kind of regular guy thing. That is the way he grew up. He grew up in Virginia, to kind of a lower middle class family. He is, I would say, just as comfortable in a sports bar in the middle of the country as he would be. Actually, he might be more comfortable there in terms of how he personally feels than at, the 21 Club or something. And he did always have, even when I knew him well, this sort of anti-elitist kind of reverse snob sort of attitude. I think because he always circulated in more elite worlds, in educationally and business, and he wasn't of that background. So I think that he does come to naturally or that is real. He's not, I mean, I think Trump is different, right? I mean, Trump never suffered like a day in his life or worried about where the next meal was going to come from or anything else. And yet he comes across as kind of like a man of the people, but he really isn't in terms of his life. Bannon has that kind of both sides of him. I know I'm not probably answering your question exactly, but I can't tell you sort of exactly how he justifies those or reconciles them, because he does a lot of things that are totally contradictory. I think he lies to himself. I mean, how do we all sort of like reconcile somewhat hypocritical things that we do and say?
I think we're going to take it out to the audience now to give them an opportunity. We have a couple of mic runners, so if you do have a question, if you could put your hand up, they'll come to you. And I see a gentleman with his hand up right over here to start.
Great. I understood you to say that he didn't exercise any editorial control. There were no requirements of that. He didn't blackball any scenes or anything. You really got to put in what you wanted to put in. And that just strikes me as more freedom than I would have expected on a subject like this. I'm surprised. Do you know how much footage was actually shot? What percentage of the content of the raw footage actually made it into the film?
Sure. So she shot several hundred hours of footage. She followed him on and off for about a year and very intensely the last 3 or 4 months leading up to the November election. I don't know what the exact ratio is, but you know, there's a lot that is not in there, and there were a lot of really hard choices. I think Alison wanted to keep the film relatively short and move at a fast pace because, you know, some of it could be boring, some of it could be disturbing, and I think, you know, having a film like this be fairly brisk is better. Are you interested to know, because it sounds like the first part of what you said, you may be wondering, like, why do I think that he gave this kind of access without control? Do you want me to talk about that? Okay. So I don't know the answer. I mean, I don't know what he was actually thinking. I think that there are a few factors. When he said yes to me, he was still in the White House. It was the end of April before he was fired in August. And I imagine things were really going downhill, as we now know from reading a lot of books and press. You know, things were heading south. So there was probably part of him that thought, like, well, what do I have to lose? You know, what's going to be my next act? This is not going well. So I think that maybe was part of the initial, his initial reason for doing it. And just to be clear, yes, he said yes, but there was still, as with most documentaries, when you follow someone, you know, the access increased over time. There was a lot of still trying to get in places and kind of like nurture that relationship. So it wasn't like from day one he was carte blanche, and, you know, we had to build, I mean, Alison had to build the relationship. I had to constantly talk to him. So there was that, I think, like, what the hell? Then I think there was also, as you hear him say in the film, you know, that he learned from Trump, there's no such thing as bad press. So I'm sure there was part of him that was like, hey, you know, it's attention. The third thing, which is why I thought he might agree, is that he's actually like an intellectual snob and a cultural snob in his own way. And he is someone that had aspirations to be successful in Hollywood and the film business, who wasn't. He really loves like the high arts, and you know, one of the reasons I think he liked me is because my career was very focused on sort of highbrow film, and he knew that it was prestigious. He knew it was very prestigious to have a film made by our team and the company that made it and is releasing it. So his ego, which is quite large, you know, I think was very excited by that. And I think that what he expected, I kept saying to him, look, you know how we feel. Don't expect something that's like extremely positive. But I think the way he's used to being critiqued and the way he's used to being discussed negatively is not quite the same as, you know, how the film, like, we're not hitting over your head every 5 seconds, like, he's a racist, he's evil. I think we show certain things about him that he maybe didn't expect, some positive, but I think certain things that are maybe, you know, strip away some of the mystique and some of the kind of powerful image, and I don't think he's very happy about that. I don't think he expected that, but I don't know, exactly why. Those are sort of my guesses.
We're going to go to the person over there standing up with the mic.
Hi, I had a question. He seemed to express no moral compass of his own throughout the whole film. He talks about the importance of winning, the importance of growing his movement, but I never, and I paid close attention to it, I never heard him ever express anything that was of a concern about a society or people or children or the future. Did I miss something? Does he have actually a moral compass, or is he that sociopathic and this is the only thing he has in his life, so this is what he's doing? Which is what I'm reading from this film.
Yeah, I mean, again, I could just say what I have observed over the years, and I would say that you're, you very smartly picked up that I think most of this work is about, to him, about winning, about power, about, I think he always saw himself or wanted to be kind of a great man in history, and he thinks that this is, a way of becoming that. It's very transactional. He was an investment banker. He likes the deal, not unlike Trump. So while I hesitate to say that it's all sort of just opportunism, and I do think that is a lot of what motivates him. And I will say that even, in talking to him a lot, if he ever was excited to tell me about something, some success that he had, it was never about like the policy, or it was always about, as you said, it was always about winning. It was always about getting that, whatever that was. It wasn't so much about, and this is going to lead to this. Now, he is a conservative. He is, he's supposedly, I say supposedly because I was raised Catholic and it's hard for me to call him a Catholic. But, he's Catholic, he's conservative Catholic. I think he lacks an ability to empathize. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to completely psychoanalyze him, but I don't think you're totally off.
We're going to come up here to the front. We've got right here in the front row. If you just want to sit tight, we've got a microphone. We got somebody coming your way with a microphone,
right this
sir.
way, on the other side, sir.
Thanks, Foster. In the talk before, you referred to him as fraudulent. He's a fraud and so forth. I didn't see anything fraudulent about him. I do think he focuses on the things right close that he can control, and he's like a broker who will tell you why the market went up today, and it's always just a story. They don't have a long game. They don't look into the future or where it's all going or anything. This guy is a tactician. He's very smart, but I think what you see is what you get. I didn't see anything. I wonder what you meant when you said he's a fraud. And as this gentleman said here, I don't see any moral compass there either.
Right.
And the effect of all this is, to the extent that he succeeds, we will then see what his long game is, and it's pretty evil. I think he would like to control everything that he could control, and if he succeeds to do that, that would really work out for the evil, not for the good. Trump is totally different. He's a complete fraud. He's just dishonest, and he lies. This guy doesn't seem to lie or manipulate any more than a lot of people do in the course of business,
Right. Yeah, so, I mean, maybe fraud isn't the right word, but what I mean by that is that he does, when he's giving his stump speech, right, he does present himself as very ideological. He presents himself as a, pretty extreme conservative. He also presents himself, I think, and has been depicted as this kind of great sort of philosopher of the far right. And as you point out, there isn't really a long-term plan. He's not someone sitting there with, like that famous whiteboard, sitting there plotting out, the next 3 years even, let alone 10 years or 20 years. He really flies by the seat of his pants. He's reactive. He's clever and smart. So, he reacts mostly well, I guess you could say, or he has good instincts. But so when I say that he's a fraud, I mean more that compared to sort of what I think he would like the world to think, the media to think, which is that he is kind of this master strategist, master manipulator, and that he is like a hardcore true believer, whether that's Catholic, whether that's, all the values that he seemingly espouses. Like at the end of the day, I don't think he gives a shit about, excuse my language, I'm sorry, about anyone but himself. So I don't think that as much as he doesn't care about the little guy, I don't really think he cares so much about the big guy, except that he's maybe one of them. So maybe I'm missing, maybe there's a better word for it, but that's really what I was getting at. I mean, I think that's what you picked up. I'm sorry, I hope that's a decent answer to your question and comment, and thank you, those interesting comments.
To the gentleman right here in the center.
Hey guys, so first of all, thanks for putting together that film. I did find it to be quite open and honest in the editorial aspect, so again, thanks. So I have a question about sort of a big elephant in the room with the film, and you saw it in multiple scenes, and you saw some of the journalists interviewing him get very frustrated about this, and that he really doesn't believe himself to be a promoter of white identity or, an excuse valve or something for far-right extremism. And I'm just sort of wondering from your guys' perspective, would you at least appreciate a level of honesty from him if he were to say something along the lines of, look, okay, white America is undergoing drastic demographic minoritization, drastic still economic dislocation. We need a form of nationalistic or even some form of an acknowledgement of white identity politics. Would you at least on some level then say, okay, at least we can take that and move forward with that on an honest way and at least see eye to eye with one another?
Me with him?
Are you asking both of us that question?
I don't know if I'm fully understanding. I mean, are you saying that would I respect him more if he was at least honest about what he seems to believe?
On some level, yeah. Like, would you? Because it seems like. Yeah, on some level, because it just seems like everyone wants him to say it.
Right.
Right. Because they're like the journalist there in the Italian hotel room is just like, you're just lying, and he's like, no, I'm not. But so I'm wondering, it's like, would you just fundamentally like be able to see eye to eye with him if you would just say something along the lines of what he
Right.
said?
I mean, I don't think I would personally say eye to him because I don't agree with that worldview. But sure, there's something very purposefully deceptive and purposefully misleading about supporting and promoting policies and media that are essentially white nationalist and then denying that. Now, in terms of his own personal beliefs, I can't tell you what's in his heart. I have my own opinion about that. But I think that a lot of the work that he has done in the last, 7 or 8 years, and certainly a lot of the work he's doing, especially in Europe, is, pretty overtly promoting white nationalism. I mean, certainly in Europe, some of those people that you see him with are way to the right of even him. They're like neo-fascist people that commemorated, the SS soldiers and things like that. So, SS. So, I think what you sense is like a frustration, because one of the ways he kind of does manipulate, I think, people and certainly the press is like he doesn't present himself as David Duke. And I'm not saying he's David Duke, but he tries to ride that line, which is like, hey, I'm like an open-minded guy. I'm a good guy. But then what he's actually spending most of his day and nights doing is definitely promoting that kind of agenda. Now, I don't know what he really believes, and sure, personally, as someone who used to really, care about him and be close to him, there is part of me that I think might sort of respect him more if I thought he really was like a fully true believer, and I would think he had maybe, gone kind of crazy. I think in some ways it's possibly worse to be someone who doesn't necessarily fully embrace personally some of those beliefs, but that would promote them for his own personal gain. But I don't think that he's like hiding it that much. I mean, he doesn't want to say it outright because it's also smart. You're not going to get as many followers if you're overtly like, hi, I'm a racist, as you are by like, hey, I'm a good guy, and these are just policies, and I actually want to support the little guy, and I want to support blacks and Hispanics, when he doesn't really give a shit about blacks and Hispanics or the little guy, So, I don't know if I'm answering your question directly, but that's about all I know how to say in response. But I get what you're asking.
Yes, over here.
So I don't really have a question. I just have more of a comment on this point, and I think this is where he's a fraud. Whatever his true beliefs are, but he promotes fascism and a class warfare, and I think that's why he's a fraud. He's a different type of fraud than Trump, who's a fraud in everything. But here he'd like to present himself as a populist, but he's a fraud because he's really a fascist, or he's promoting fascism, whether he believes that or not. And incidentally, it was a terrific film. Thank you.
Thank you, and I agree with your comment. Thank you.
Do we have any last questions or comments? We're going to take the one hand I see all the way in the back for the final question, comment of the evening.
Yes, hello. Thank you for making this movie. Do you know what was his reaction to the film?
Sure. So I showed him the film when it was finished. The film premiered at the Sundance Film Festival, so a couple of weeks before I showed him the film, I went to DC. I watched it alone with him. It was quite an experience. I wish I could have actually filmed that, but I would say that it's a strange experience for anyone to watch himself or herself. We followed him for a year. You're watching yourself in ways you've never seen yourself. So he was, I think he was like kind of confused, and he was also just very focused on himself, like just his person, because it's a strange experience. He did get quite upset about one scene, the scene with the Chinese billionaire, and the sort of suggestion that he might be taking money from him, which would be a federal crime if he was putting that towards his efforts in the United States. He screamed at me to remove it, which of course we didn't, but I kind of talked him down. And yeah, I think he sort of otherwise held his cards close to his vest. Now, since then, so that was a couple weeks before Sundance, then leading up to Sundance, he was pretty interested in what was happening. Again, he's like a bit of a culture snob, and also it's like attention for him. So he was, and I had to be in touch with him pretty often and his people for logistics and stuff. So he was talking to me a lot, contacting me a lot, texting me a lot. And then the reviews started to come out during Sundance. And he then just cut me off. Like, he ghosted me completely from one moment to the next. And I don't think he's very happy with the film. He's smart enough and very media savvy enough that when journalists ask him, he just has no comment. But, knowing him pretty well and judging from the fact that he completely severed the relationship with me, I think that the way that the press has spoken about him in the film is not really how he expected to be spoken about, and he's not happy with that. But, you know, that's only what I could imagine based on his behavior.
I suppose the irony there being that you mentioned that he so badly wanted to be thought of as successful in the movie industry, and here he has a film that, as a critical film, is quite successful and highly acclaimed critically, but of course
is that
he can't.
I think the part of him that was kind of a mentor to me when I was younger is probably pretty proud, because, you know, all along the way he'd like, I don't think he thought I could really pull this off. And you know that Errol Morris, another filmmaker, made a documentary about him, which is a whole other story, because Bannon agreed to that behind my back when we were already in production. But that film, you know, for reasons that are not for me to express my opinion about, has not seen the light of day. It does not have distribution. It is not being released, as far as I know, and it's been almost a year. And Bannon would say, like, I can't believe, you know, Errol Morris, like, Oscar-winning film, and, like, nothing is happening with his movie. And you and, like, Alison, this unknown director. She's not unknown, but she's not Errol Morris. So I think part of him is probably like, wow, you know, but I think he just didn't, I don't think that the presentation is exactly as he hoped. But who knows? I don't know, because he's not talking to me.
Well, on that note, Marie-Therese, I want to thank you so much for
Thank
taking
you,
on
everyone,
a
for
very
coming and staying.
difficult film. Yeah, and thank you
really
all so
appreciate
much
it.
for coming
And all the
tonight.
smart questions and comments. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.